January 17th, 1945. Bastogne, Belgium. The snow falls in silence, thick and unrelenting, blanketing the shattered streets of a town that has become a graveyard of steel and ambition. The temperature hovers just below zero. Exhaust from idling engines mingles with the smoke of burning wreckage, creating a fog that clings to the frozen earth. Amid the wreckage of half-tracks and Tiger tanks, a single American Jeep sits motionless, its front axle shattered, its hood punctured by shrapnel. The vehicle is worthless now, or so it seems. Around it, soldiers of the 101st Airborne Division huddle in foxholes, their breath visible in the bitter air, their hands too numb to feel the triggers of their rifles. The siege has lasted weeks. Supplies are nearly gone. And yet, 3 men kneel beside that broken Jeep, their faces blackened with oil and exhaustion, their hands moving with the urgency of surgeons over a dying patient. They do not speak. They do not need to. They are performing a ritual that will be repeated 10,000 times across a dozen battlefields. A ritual born not from desperation, but from something deeper. Something woven into the fabric of American industrial philosophy, the belief that nothing is truly broken, only temporarily paused. This is not a story about a Jeep. It is a story about the mind that refuses to accept defeat, about hands that reshape metal because surrender is not written into their vocabulary. It is a story about the moment when ingenuity became doctrine, when field repair transformed into tactical advantage, when a vehicle designed to be expendable became the symbol of an army that would not stop moving, no matter the cost. The year is 1945, and the war in Europe is entering its final, most brutal chapter. Germany's last great gamble, the Ardennes offensive, has thrown the Allied advance into chaos. The Wehrmacht, exhausted and outgunned, has summoned the ghosts of Blitzkrieg one final time, crashing through the snow-covered forests of Belgium with a ferocity that shocks even the most hardened American commanders. The surprise is total. The cost is staggering. And yet, within days, the momentum begins to shift, not because of grand strategy or overwhelming firepower, but because of something the Germans did not anticipate, something they could not replicate even if they understood it. The American soldier, cut off from supply lines, surrounded by enemy armor, does not wait for orders. He improvises, he adapts. He takes what is broken and makes it work again, not because he is told to, but because the idea of simply abandoning equipment is foreign to him, almost offensive. This philosophy, this refusal to accept mechanical failure as final, will become one of the unspoken pillars of American victory. The German soldier, by contrast, has been trained in a different tradition. His equipment is engineered to perfection, designed by minds that worship precision and complexity. His tanks are marvels of metallurgy, his vehicles masterpieces of over-engineering. But when a Panther tank throws a track in the mud of the Eastern Front, when a Kuba-wagon-S transmission seizes in the frozen forests of the Ardennes, there is no field manual for what comes next. There is only the slow, sinking realization that perfection is the enemy of survival. That a weapon designed to never fail is also a weapon that cannot be easily repaired when failure is inevitable. The German army, once the most mobile and mechanized force on earth, is slowly grinding to a halt, not because it lacks courage or discipline, but because it has built a war machine that demands factory-level maintenance in a world where factories are being bombed into rubble. The Americans, meanwhile, roll into battle with vehicles that are almost insultingly simple. The Willys MB Jeep, the workhorse of the US Army, is built from parts that can be swapped, replaced, or fabricated in the field with nothing more than a wrench and a welder's torch. Its engine is uncomplicated, its frame modular, its philosophy rooted in mass production and battlefield pragmatism. It is not elegant. It is not designed to last forever. but it is designed to be fixed by men who have never seen the inside of an engineering school. Men whose only training is the kind that comes from growing up in a nation where tinkering with cars and tractors is a rite of passage. These men do not see a broken Jeep as scrap metal. They see it as a puzzle, a challenge, an opportunity. And so, in Bastogne, in the Hurtgen forest, in 1,000 forgotten crossroads across Europe, they perform miracles with spare parts and stubbornness. The Jeep in Bastogne has a fractured front axle, the result of a near miss from a German mortar round. The explosion lifted the vehicle off the ground and slammed it back down onto a chunk of concrete, snapping the axle cleanly in two. By all rights, the vehicle should be abandoned, pushed off the road to make way for the living. But the men of the 101st have no spare vehicles. They have no resupply column coming to save them. They have only what they can scavenge, what they can steal from the dead, what they can repair with their own hands. And so the 3 soldiers, a mechanic from Detroit, a farmhand from Iowa, and a former railway worker from Pennsylvania begin their work. They do not have a replacement axle. They do not have a welding rig. What they have is a length of iron pipe scavenged from a bombed-out barn, a cutting torch borrowed from an engineer unit, and the kind of improvised ingenuity that will later be studied in military academies as adaptive maintenance doctrine. The mechanic measures the diameter of the broken axle with his fingers, eyeballing the dimensions because there are no calipers, no blueprints, no engineers to consult. The farmhand cuts the pipe to length, heating the metal with the torch until it glows red, then hammering it against a rock to flatten the ends. The railway worker drills holes through the makeshift axle using a hand drill, his arms shaking from the cold and the effort, his breath coming in ragged gasps. It takes them 4 hours. When they are done, the repair is ugly, asymmetrical, held together by bolts that do not quite fit and welds that will crack under sustained stress. But it works. The Jeep rolls forward, its engine coughing to life, and the 3 men do not cheer or celebrate. They simply move on to the next broken vehicle, because there is always another one. Always another problem that needs solving. This scene, repeated across 100 battlefields, becomes the defining characteristic of American military logistics. The US Army does not win because it has the best equipment. It wins because it has the most equipment, and because that equipment can be kept running under conditions that would cripple any other force. The German military, steeped in the tradition of Prussian engineering, looks at a broken tank and sees a catastrophic failure, a loss that must be reported up the chain of command, investigated, blamed on someone. The American soldier looks at a broken tank and sees an afternoon's work. This difference in mindset is not trivial. It is the difference between an army that can advance 300 miles in a month and an army that grinds to a halt, waiting for spare parts that will never arrive. The philosophy behind this approach has its roots in the American industrial heartland, in the factories of Detroit and Pittsburgh, where mass production has become a religion. Henry Ford's assembly line, the principles of interchangeable parts, the idea that a machine should be built not to last forever but to be easily replaced. All of these concepts have been absorbed into the American way of war. The Jeep is the perfect embodiment of this philosophy. It is cheap, simple, and ubiquitous. By the end of the war, over 600,000 Willys MB Jeeps will have been produced, flooding every theater of combat with a vehicle that can be driven by anyone, repaired by anyone, and used for anything. It is a weapons carrier, an ambulance, a reconnaissance vehicle, a command post, a mobile radio station. It is whatever the situation demands, because its design does not impose limitations. It invites modification, encourages creativity, rewards improvisation. The Germans, watching American columns roll past their defensive positions, do not initially understand what they are seeing. They see vehicles that look fragile, almost toil-like compared to the heavy steel of their own trucks and half-tracks. They see soldiers who treat their equipment with a casualness that borders on disrespect, leaving jeeps parked in the open, engines running, keys in the ignition. This seems wasteful, even arrogant. But as the war drags on, as German supply lines collapse and fuel becomes scarce, the truth becomes unavoidable. The Americans can afford to be casual because they have abundance. They can leave a jeep running because there will be another one tomorrow. They can weld a broken axle back together in a muddy field because the design of the vehicle assumes that it will be broken repeatedly, and that this is not a failure of engineering but an expected part of its operational life. By contrast, the German Kübelwagen, though brilliantly designed, requires specialized tools and trained mechanics. Its air-cooled engine is efficient and reliable, but when it fails, the repair demands precision and expertise. The Schwimmwagen, the amphibious variant, is even more complex. A marvel of engineering that breaks down with alarming frequency and requires parts that are increasingly impossible to find. As the war turns against Germany, as factories are bombed and supply depots overrun, the Wehrmacht's mechanized units begin to cannibalize their own vehicles, stripping 3 broken machines to create one working one. It is a slow death by attrition, a mechanical hemorrhage that no amount of tactical brilliance can stop. The Japanese face a similar reckoning in the Pacific. Their military trucks, many of them copied from American designs but built to tighter tolerances, proved difficult to maintain in the jungles of New Guinea and the Philippines. Japanese soldiers, encountering abandoned American jeeps, are initially dismissive. The vehicles seem crude, their engines noisy, their frames flimsy. But when they attempt to drive captured jeeps, they discover something unsettling. The vehicles work, even after being submerged in rivers, even after taking small arms fire, even after weeks without maintenance. The Americans have built machines that survive neglect, machines that tolerate abuse, machines that keep running long after they should have failed. This is not an accident. It is a design philosophy that prioritizes function over form, survival over elegance. One Japanese officer, captured in the Philippines, is interrogated about his impressions of American equipment. His answer, recorded in a post-war debriefing, is telling. "Your vehicles are built by men who expect them to break," he says. "Ours are built by men who believe they should never break. We were wrong. In war, everything breaks. The question is whether you can fix it." This realization comes too late for the Japanese war effort, but it captures the fundamental truth that the Americans have understood from the beginning. War is not a test of engineering perfection. It is a test of adaptability, of resilience, of the ability to keep moving forward even when everything is falling apart. The symbol of this philosophy, the object that appears again and again in the memories of soldiers from every theater, is the Jeep itself. It is more than a vehicle. It is a promise that the war machine will not abandon you, that help is always just a field repair away, that the system is designed to keep you in the fight. German soldiers, retreating across France in the summer of 1944, watch in disbelief as American jeeps race past their broken-down trucks, engines roaring, packed with soldiers and supplies. They have been told that the Americans are soft, that they rely on machines because they lack discipline, that their industrial might is a paper tiger. But what they see on the roads of Normandy and the forests of the Ardennes tells a different story. They see an army that has fused man and machine into a single, relentless entity, an army where the line between soldier and mechanic has blurred into irrelevance. The transformation of the Jeep from simple transport into a war-winning weapon happens gradually, through 1,000 small modifications made by soldiers in the field. A machine gun is mounted on the back, turning the vehicle into a mobile weapons platform. A radio is installed, making it a command vehicle. Extra fuel cans are strapped to the sides, extending its range. Canvas covers are removed to reduce weight, then added back to protect against rain, then removed again when speed is more important than comfort. The Jeep becomes whatever it needs to be because its design does not fight against modification. It welcomes it. This adaptability extends beyond the vehicle itself. The men who drive and maintain the Jeeps develop a culture of self-reliance that sets them apart from soldiers in more rigid military systems. They trade parts with other units, fabricate replacements from scrap, modify engines to run on low-grade fuel when high-octane gasoline is unavailable. They learn to diagnose problems by sound, by smell, by the feel of the steering wheel in their hands. This knowledge is not taught in manuals or classrooms. It is passed down from veteran to replacement, from mechanic to driver, in the same way that folklore is transmitted through demonstration, repetition, and shared experience. By the spring of 1945, as Allied armies drive deep into Germany, the contrast between American and German mechanized mobility has become a chasm. American units advance so quickly that they outrun their own supply lines, yet they continue moving, living off captured German fuel and food, repairing their vehicles with whatever materials they can find. German units, surrounded and cut off, find themselves immobilized, not by lack of will, but by lack of working trucks. The roads of the Reich are littered with abandoned vehicles, their engines intact but useless, their fuel tanks empty, their crews forced to retreat on foot. The psychological impact of this disparity cannot be overstated. German soldiers, indoctrinated with the belief that superior engineering and discipline would carry them to victory, are forced to confront the reality that they are being beaten not by a more professional army, but by a more practical one. The Americans do not outfight them in every engagement. They do not always have better tactics or braver soldiers, but they never stop moving. They never run out of vehicles, and when something breaks, they fix it and keep going. This relentless, grinding momentum is more demoralizing than any defeat in battle. The end of the war brings no respite for the philosophy of field repair. As American forces occupy Germany and Japan, the Jeeps continue to roll, now carrying military governors and reconstruction supplies instead of ammunition and soldiers. The vehicles that were welded together in the forests of Belgium, that crossed the Rhine on pontoon bridges, that drove through the ruins of Berlin, do not retire gracefully. They are shipped to Korea, to Vietnam, to every corner of the American security apparatus, where they continue to serve for decades. Many of the Jeeps built in 1942 are still running in the 1970s. Maintained by mechanics who learned their trade from men who learned it in Bastogne. The legacy of the field fix, of the improvised repair, of the refusal to accept mechanical failure as final, extends far beyond military logistics. It becomes a metaphor for the American approach to war itself: pragmatic, adaptable, willing to discard doctrine when reality demands it. The armies that defeated the Axis powers did not do so because they had the best soldiers or the best generals. They did so because they had systems that could absorb failure, adapt to chaos, and continue functioning under conditions that would paralyze more rigid organizations in the decades after the war. Military historians and engineers study the phenomenon of American field maintenance, trying to codify the lessons, to turn intuition into doctrine. They write manuals on adaptive logistics and battlefield improvisation. But the essence of what made the system work resists easy categorization. It was not a set of procedures. It was a mindset, a cultural expectation that problems would be solved at the lowest possible level, by the people closest to the problem, with whatever resources were available. This mindset could not be trained into soldiers. It had to be culturally embedded, passed down from a society that valued self-reliance and practical problem-solving over deference to authority and adherence to procedure. The Jeep in Bastogne, repaired with a length of iron pipe and raw determination, is eventually abandoned when the siege is lifted. A fresh vehicle arrives with the relief column, and the patched-together machine is left behind, its makeshift axle finally cracking under the strain. No one records its serial number or documents its fate. It is not deemed worthy of preservation, not considered historically significant, but in its anonymous end, there is a kind of poetry. It was never meant to last forever. It was meant to solve a problem, to keep men moving, to bridge the gap between breakdown and repair. It did its job. And then, like 10,000 other Jeeps scattered across a dozen battlefields, it was forgotten. But it represented the idea that nothing is irreparable, that every problem has a solution if you are willing to improvise, that abundance and adaptability can overcome precision and perfection. That idea survived. It became part of the institutional memory of the American military, woven into training programs and maintenance doctrines. It spread beyond the military, into the civilian economy, influencing everything from automotive design to disaster relief logistics. The refusal to accept defeat in the face of mechanical failure became a metaphor for a broader refusal to accept defeat at all. The German soldiers who survived the war, who returned to a shattered homeland and began the long process of rebuilding, carried their own lessons. Some of them working in the factories of the Wirtschaftswunder, the economic miracle of the 1950s, began to incorporate American principles of modularity and ease of repair into their designs. The Volkswagen Beetle, perhaps the most successful civilian vehicle of the post-war era, owes much of its design philosophy to the lessons learned from the Jeep. Simple, reliable, easy to fix with basic tools. The irony is not lost on historians. The nation that once prided itself on engineering perfection learned, through defeat, that perfection is less valuable than practicality. The Japanese underwent a similar transformation. The post-war automotive industry, built on the ruins of the wartime military-industrial complex, embraced American principles of mass production and standardization. Toyota, Honda, and Nissan did not emerge from nowhere. They emerged from a generation of engineers who had seen American abundance firsthand, who had studied captured vehicles and recognized the genius in their simplicity. The Toyota production system, often hailed as a revolutionary approach to manufacturing, is in many ways an elaboration of the principles that animated the Jeep's design-build things that can be easily modified. Reduce complexity, empower workers to solve problems without waiting for management approval. And so the story of the Jeep, and of the men who refused to let it stay broken, becomes a story about the diffusion of ideas, about how military doctrines become industrial practices, about how a philosophy born in the mud and snow of the Ardennes shapes the world for generations. It is a story that resists clean endings, because its influence continues to ripple outward, touching everything from supply chain management to software development. The concept of agile problem-solving, the emphasis on iterative improvement, the celebration of the minimum viable product, all of these modern ideas trace their lineage, in part, to the men who knelt beside a broken Jeep in Bastogne and decided that failure was not an option. The snow in Bastogne has long since melted. The foxholes have been filled in. The soldiers who performed that first field repair, who cut and welded and improvised their way through a crisis, are mostly gone now, their names lost to time, but the principle they embodied, that ingenuity can triumph over adversity, that a problem is just an opportunity in disguise, that the true measure of a system is not how well it works when everything goes right, but how well it adapts when everything goes wrong. That principle endures. It is not written in bronze on monuments. It is written in the DNA of institutions, in the habits of engineers, in the reflexes of mechanics who, when confronted with a broken machine, do not ask whether it can be fixed. They ask only how, and how quickly, and what tools they need to make it happen. This is the field fix that turned a broken Jeep into a war weapon. Not because the repair was elegant or perfect, but because it was sufficient. Not because it lasted forever, but because it lasted long enough. And in that sufficiency, in that pragmatic acceptance of imperfection, lies a truth about freedom and democracy that transcends battlefields and military hardware. Systems that tolerate failure, that distribute problem-solving authority to the lowest levels, that value adaptability over control, these are the systems that survive. These are the systems that win. Not because they never break, but because they refuse to stay broken.